Please settle down. I kindly invite our international expert, Professor Babita Gupta, and hand over the dais to him. Ma'am, please come.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you feeling today? Ready to learn? Ready to learn something new, perhaps? Okay. All right. So let me see if we can get set up here before we do anything else. ऐसे ही रहेगा? अच्छा. Do we need to adjust the lights? Sure, that'll be good. ठीक है. So are we all set? Okay. All right. Good afternoon again. So my first question is, can you all see the screen well? Okay. And can you all hear me in the back? Okay. Thank you. So today and for next 5 days, we are going to be talking about a new technology, sort of new technology, blockchain, and how it is helping organizations be more secure. And our last session would be on January 13th, and today is going to be introductions. My name is Dr. Babita Gupta. I'm a professor of information system at California State University, Monterey Bay. The one on the right-hand side, that's the coast area where I live. It's called Big Sur. Sur is Spanish for south. It's a beautiful area, and I hope many of you will get a chance to visit this beautiful place. And that's our College of Business where I work. So just a quick introduction to where I'm from. And today we are going to be focusing mostly on getting familiar with what is blockchain, why is it needed, what are some of the basic terminologies, and then we'll build on that moving forward over the next 4 days. So because it's a total of 15 plus 5 hours, we have to keep in mind that in a short amount of time we won't be able to become experts. So it won't be possible for you to, after 5 days, okay, I know exactly how to implement a blockchain in my organizations and I know all the ins and outs. But that's okay. What I think we are all aiming for is to understand, gain an understanding, so that if we are working in an organization already, or you are engaged in research work, or you are in a different discipline, you can begin to see how what you're learning applies to your own field and your own area of expertise. And more importantly, you get an understanding of that everything that is hyped always has flaws. It's always important to understand that anything that's hyped so much, okay, is it really so? You know, what are the things that we need to be aware of? What are the things that if your manager or an organization you plan to work for, or you yourself want to implement it, what are the things you should think about? Is this the right thing for me? And so on. So we are aiming for an overview. Keeping that in mind, we'll try to go into some technical details. This course does not have any coding because we just don't have any time for all of that. But I hope those of you who are interested, after these sessions, perhaps you would be inclined to go further in depth and therefore look for courses. There are several online where you can get more in-depth understanding of these concepts. In terms of the pedagogy, or at least how I like to conduct, please ask questions. Sometimes I may be talking about something that I feel is clear but may not be clear to you. Just raise your hand and ask me that could you tell me more about it. I would appreciate that. And in between, we'll try to have brief discussion questions and little quizzes just to make sure that we are understanding whatever it is that we are talking about. How does that sound? Okay. All right. So first thing, because the course is blockchain for secured organizations. So the first question is, why do organizations need security? I mean, I think most of us know why, but we want to take a look from the perspective of how some of the things that organizations are dealing with, how is that need being addressed or could be addressed by blockchain. And we want to make sure that we are all on the same page regarding certain terminologies. Some of you may be from engineering background, some of you may be from business or others. In fact, let me get a show of hands. How many of you are from engineering background? Okay, and how many of you from business? Okay, and how many from other than these two? Some of you, okay. So we have a mix of people, so that's why I designed the sessions to keep that in mind. And for some of you, you may know this already, so please be patient because others may not know about it. So what is an organization? So organizations, businesses, they are connections, they are networks. They are networks of customers, sellers, suppliers, banks, partners, etc., right? And the purpose of these organizations is to create wealth. And the wealth is created by flow of goods and services, right? We know all of that. We buy and sell every day in our own life experience. And markets are created basically to facilitate this wealth creation by different organizational networks. So two types of markets that we are familiar with, public markets, right? I mean, we go to the nearby shop, it's open to everybody, you pay the money and you get your goods and services. But then there are private markets like auction houses, behind the scene banks when they are bank-to-bank transactions and so on and so forth. So that's basic structure of organizations, market and the wealth creation. And of course, organizations are constantly looking for how to create more wealth at a lower cost. And you get usually lower cost by more efficiencies. And some of those efficiencies can come from figuring out the resources that you might be expending in things like security, for example. So what do organizations have? They have assets and value. So assets are your physical and non-physical assets, like you own buildings, or you're selling amarud on the roadside, or factories and so on. Intangibles are things like patents and intellectual property, and software sometimes is considered intangibles also. And in the intangibles, you have further subdivisions. So those of you who are from business or finance area, you probably know this very well, that you have financial assets, intellectual assets, digital assets, and so on. And cash, of course, right? It's anonymous. Why is cash considered anonymous? Anybody? Why does the cash consider to have an anonymous property?
We can't track back the hands cash has exchanged before reaching a particular person.
Thank you. That was very good. When I pay somebody with cash, that person doesn't know who else had it before me, and I wouldn't know who else will get that cash after me. And the reason I talk about this is an important thing to keep in mind as we move further, because when we talk about blockchain, we talk about this chain of custody or provenance, which becomes an important concept. So the other thing that we are going to be talking a lot about is something called ledgers. Remember those Munimjis from old days in old movies? Bahi khata, that's exactly what it is. So what is the purpose of a ledger? Because all organizations, if they want to survive long term, have to keep track of transactions, right? Who bought what, when, how much, etc., right? So that's exactly what it is, and it's over time. You want to maintain your ledgers over time for a sustainable business model. If you are not, then those businesses don't survive for very long, because after a while they lose track of their assets, their expenses, and so on. Again, those of you in the accounting, anybody from accounting here? Oh, many of you. So you guys are the experts. I'm gonna, I'm not even gonna attempt to be, finance and accounting is not my forte. But for our purposes, basically it's tracking your basic income, expenses, and liabilities and assets. And we have, of course, more and more electronic version of these ledgers, right? People, small businesses will have Excel spreadsheet. Bigger corporations will have something more sophisticated, ERP systems and whatnot. So, but at the end of it, it is a ledger which keeps track of transactions over time. So we have digital ledgers more and more. And then the terminology that we will come across a lot is participants, transactions, and contracts. So participants are again anybody who is engaged in that organizational business network, your suppliers, customers, government. Where do you think government or the regulator comes into the picture? Can you give me some examples of a business or a transaction?
Taxes. Through taxes.
Taxes?
For government.
For government, yeah. Paying tax is a kind of transaction. Any other?
Regulatory body like SBI, SAB, they also assess the accounts.
So there are lots of business, financial markets, for example, definitely you have to comply with government regulations and so on and so forth. Transaction is simply an asset transfer. I have something, I give it to somebody else for some services or money, and that's a transaction that needs to be recorded. So that's, and contracts, of course, normally when we go out and buy a cup of coffee or groceries, we don't have contracts, right? We don't sign, because those are simple transactions, right? But for more complex transactions, like if you're buying a house or if you're buying a car, you have to have a contract that is signed by different parties. It has different conditions that if you default, this would happen, or if seller defaults, this would happen, and there are penalties and all kinds of things that everybody agrees to, and then it is executed. So far, so good? So the title of the slide says Weaknesses of the Trust-Based Transaction Model. So can somebody tell me, where is this trust-based transaction model? What is it we are talking about? Yes.
Cartels are formed between the organizations.
Louder, louder.
When cartels are formed between the organizations, they are a kind of trust-based transactions.
Right. So usually, like in the case of buying a car or buying a house, you go through usually a third party, right? What are those third parties typically? Banks, right? So those banks, you are basically trusting the bank, and the bank is in turn trusting you. Of course, you have to fill out the paperwork, verification, and all kinds of things. But ultimately, it is still trust-based, because everything process that you have can only go so far. So these are all trust-based model which we engage in pretty much every day. And usually third parties they came into being to basically make it easier for buyers and sellers to reduce their fraud, reduce their vulnerability to fraud, and so on, right? So in the olden days, before the banks were there, it used to be the village sahukar. So those third parties have always been there. It's just their scope and complexity has grown over centuries. So what are the weaknesses? Most of it is again something that we may be familiar with, that as everything becomes more and more complex, right, the scope and complexity grows. So we have to rely more and more on these third parties, the government regulations. Government has to come up with new regulations for every new thing. For example, yesterday I was talking to Mr. Vinay, and I think we'll be visiting his place of his office, I believe on Saturday, because he does blockchain work. So we were talking, and he was talking about that the government regulations are still not there, and that's true for most countries. Forget about blockchain, even the e-commerce, most governments don't have robust set of policies and regulations, because the technology evolves so fast and governments typically are very, very slow and far behind. So that's why we have all these frauds and cybersecurity frauds and all of these things proliferating, because certain actors will take advantage of this gap between the policy and regulations and what's actually happening. The other thing with the third party model, which is trust-based model, is that the banks have a say, right? Banks can decide who they want to give the loan to and who they don't want to. And it may have nothing to do with your financial viability. It may be that they just don't like you, right? For whatever reason. So we are dependent on these third parties because they have the power, so they can negotiate better, they can set the rules to benefit them, and that is what happens, right? Most of the time banks can charge you whatever interest rate they want on credit cards or whatever it is that you have. And the other thing is that the double spending, this is a problem of double spending, which is basically, if I'm selling something, if I promise to sell something to you, right, and you're going to give me the money, you promise me the money, how do I know that you actually have the money? That's first question. You may say you have it, but then when I actually deliver the good, you don't. The second is, you may be giving me, especially in the digital transactions, you may be saying that you have transferred the money, but it's also been promised to 10 other people. That's what happens in most of the fraud cases, right? So that's called the problem of double spending, and that's where the third parties are useful, and that's why they exist. The banks and all these other middlemen, they are the ones who then take charge of ensuring as much as possible that this double spending does not occur and the fraud is kept to a minimum. It's not eliminated completely, but it's kept to a minimum. So this is where then this new technology called blockchain comes in. The promise of blockchain is that it aims to eliminate all the middlemen and the third parties involved in any transaction. So if I want to invest in something, instead of having to go through a bank or a financial institution which helps me in the investment, I can do it directly and not have to pay any fees, transaction fees to the middleman, and not have to deal with them. So that's one thing, and it's called peer-to-peer decentralized system, and we're going to take a look at more detail what each of these things really mean. So you don't need a bank, you don't need a lawyer, and you're not having to rely on the government. That's the promise of blockchain or peer-to-peer transactional model. So let me hear from you. Have you heard about blockchain before? How many of you have? I know you have. Okay, only a couple of you. Okay, so tell me, what is your perception of what is blockchain? Is it going to solve all these problems, or is it something that's tamper-proof, or what are the perceptions we have? Because, you know, we read about things and certain things stick in our mind. And also, by the way, it's good to know that most of you are starting from a clean slate, so that makes it easy for me to. Anything that comes to mind?
It is a distributed database which is connected through some codes and networks.
Right, but do you think blockchain is able to then give us the utopia, which is that all the banks would vanish, all the financial institutions will vanish, and then we will just be doing business with each other over blockchain and secure? No. Okay, good. The other myth that's there is that blockchain is unbreakable, that it's very, very secure, which is true. It's very, very secure with the caveat that it can be broken. So, any questions so far? Anything? Okay, so let's, I think I just wanted to have a quick discussion. So, the promise of blockchain is that all the intermediaries would be gone, the banks and the regulators. So, do you think, first of all, can we think of any potential risks associated with this kind of decentralization? And you're welcome to talk to your neighbors and for 1 minute. How about that? Okay, let's do it. I need to see you guys talking to each other and then coming up, and just raise your hand and we'll get some ideas from you. So those are the 2 questions I have for you. Let's do the first one. What are the potential risks associated with decentralization? Feel free to talk with your neighbor. That's a good way to also get to know your fellow audience. And as you come up with something, just raise your hand. हाँ बताइए. Privacy?
प्राइवेसी ब्रीच हो सकती है.
Privacy breach हो सकती है. Okay. Let him finish and then I'll come to you. Yes. So that's a good point, and we'll get back to it. One response is that because of decentralization, everybody can see how much you're paying for your transactions and know how much money we have. So we will keep that in mind when we get into blockchain, that how does blockchain take care of that. Now you, sir.
There will be a lot of ethical concerns like increase of fraud, etc.
Increase of fraud? Okay. Yes, there is always a potential for that. Yes. What else? Anybody else? Let's do one more. Okay. All right. We'll talk more about when we get into decentralization. And then now think of the second question. So you and I now are in charge of managing our own money for everything. So do you think that's good idea, or there might be some issues? Put yourself in that position. Anyone?
Complexity.
Right. Right now I'm focusing on my work, so I don't have to worry about my bank and paying this or that, a credit card, take. But now I have to worry about okay, what are my public keys and private keys, and things of that. So that's one. It increases the load on the individual's shoulder. Okay. Anything else? Security. I have to.
More secure than our own wallet.
I have to now worry about keeping my wallet, which will keep all these technical details secure, and how secure, and so I'm again relying on somebody else to keep it secure for me. So there is always that. You wanted to say, sir, something? No? Okay. So you see that any new thing that comes in, it solves certain problems, but it also creates other set of problems. So now let's get familiar with what is this technology. So we are going to be looking at something called distributed ledger. We know what a ledger is, so now we are going to talk about in blockchain, what does this ledger look like, and the key characteristics. Any paper, any blog, any article you read about blockchain, they always talk about it is decentralized, it is immutable, it is transparent, and it is secure. So those are the 4 pillars, so to say. So we're going to take a look at each of those pillars and see how is it being done, and then of course what might be the gaps or issues. So just a quick look at history. So blockchain, like Professor Verma was saying, it has been around for some time. It's been around certainly since 2008. That's when this seminal paper by Satoshi Nakamoto he or she or they. Nobody knows who this person is. Are you guys familiar with this mythology? Some of you are. So far, nobody really knows who this person is. Is it one person? Is it a Japanese person? Or is it a group of people? Or is it a company? They have tried all kinds of detective work and over the years to try and figure out who this person might be, but nobody knows. So that makes it very mysterious somehow, but and exciting in a little way. But so this person or persons, I'm just going to refer Satoshi Nakamoto as a he because that's the Japanese name for male gender, but it could be a female. He introduced this white paper in a blog, not in a journal, and that was a seminal paper. I would encourage you all to read this paper. It's 9 pages long, and it's written in a very simple manner. There is a little bit of probability discussion there, but most of the other things are very understandable and readable. So it's always best to go back to the original source. A lot of my material comes directly from this paper directly because he wrote it so beautifully. Then in 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto and the company he created was Bitcoin.org, and they basically showed that the theoretical work that they had proposed in 2008 could actually be implemented, and they did implement it. And it came out as a Bitcoin in the beginning. And then from then, over the years, in last 15 years, almost 17 years now, it's 2025. A lot of different applications have come, a lot of different platforms, a lot of different ways of applications of blockchain. So Bitcoin started, then cryptocurrencies came about, then smart contracts, then NFTs, and all kinds of things. And there is a huge overlap in all of these applications, and we'll look at some of those either later today or tomorrow. So what is a blockchain? So first is it's a distributed decentralized ledger. So think of that ledger that Munimji's Bahi Khata. So it's or a database in a digital world usually, but now it's distributed and it's decentralized. Decentralized simply means that it's not one entity or one computer that controls that ledger. Everybody has the same ledger. Everybody has access to it, and everybody can see what's written in that ledger. When I say can see, within quotes, because there is some anonymity in there. So the idea is, as the name suggests, there is a block of data, and these blocks of data are connected together, and they form a chain. So the first block is the earliest transaction, and subsequent transactions you keep building newer and newer blocks. So the most recent block will have the most recent transactions, and then if you want to go back further in history to look at older transactions, you go back to the earlier blocks. Okay, and we'll see what does this block mean and how are they connected together. But it's good to visualize like literally the blocks, and then there is a chain. To me it always helps to visualize things. So each block has something called transaction data, like who sold what to whom, how much, right? And the timestamp, when did this transaction take place, the date and the time, and something called a hash, which ties it to the previous block. So it's kind of like a block, and then when a block becomes sort of full, then you add a new block, so that new block is tied to the old block by something called cryptographic hash. So we'll take a look at that. But so far, do we have a visual image in our brains about what a blockchain might look like? Each block has transaction data with the timestamp and something called cryptographic hash. So distributed ledger, I'm saying, it's shared, meaning anybody who is part of the blockchain network has access to the same ledger. It's shared. Anytime any transaction occurs and it is accepted, then that updated blockchain is available to all the participants. And they can see the system of record. So that's essentially shared ledger technology. It's called distributed ledger. So what we have is we have different participants, and what is considered a participant, it's actually a CPU or a computer, because if I'm part of a blockchain network, I participate through my computer, which is considered a CPU essentially. And these network of computers, they're called nodes. So I am a node, you might be a node. So in this people, if all of us were part of a blockchain network, we might have 80 different nodes, because we each have a CPU that is participating in this blockchain. Okay. So the last thing this says, I don't know if you can see it, I know it's a little bit hard to read. A synchronized version of the ledger, meaning everybody can see the same ledger. Not that I can see the most updated one and you only see the 2 transactions before and so on. So what that does is it introduces the concept of transparency. Now, how is that different from traditional third parties like banks and so on? Do you think third parties like banks and financial institutions are completely transparent? Not at all, right? I mean, if you go and apply for a loan, you really don't know what loan rate or interest rate they are charging your neighbor or somebody else. It's like dynamic pricing on e-commerce, right? You don't know how much the next person paid for the same thing that you're buying yourself. So in this case, blockchain has this property of transparency because everybody has the same ledger. So you'll see this being repeated again and again because it's worth repeating that a distributed ledger technology, that's the other name for blockchain. So sometimes blockchain is not called blockchain, it's called distributed ledger technology or DLT. And typically if you are doing, I have a colleague, she and I are working on a research project in blockchain on how the custom system, right? I mean, I think so, export and import thing. There's a lot of fraud that happens there, right? Because you can alter what came in from the port and was leaving by just, you know, if you're good at forgery and all, so it's very easy to do all those kind of things. So in that scenario, usually we don't refer to it as blockchain, it's referred to as distributed ledger technology. So any questions from this? Are we on the same page in terms of what is a distributed ledger technology? We have a ledger, a digital ledger, and the same ledger is available to all the nodes and accessible to all the nodes, and therefore is transparent. So the decentralization, that was one of the properties, right? That blockchain is decentralized, or it removes all the intermediaries. So it's peer-to-peer network. Are you guys familiar with what's peer-to-peer network? You remember those days when you could download the music for free? That was possible because I would put some music online and I'll make it public, and then you could come and download it without having to go through the buying and selling of the music or paying royalties. Those days are gone, of course, now, but we had it for a brief time. Some of you, I don't think many of you were even born in that time period. It was quite a long time ago now. So there's this second bullet point. Decentralization removes single points of failure which are vulnerable to hacks and corruption. Can we have a show of hands on what do we mean by single point of failure in a typical traditional environment? What might we be talking about?
When all the information is gathered at a single point, which is at a higher hierarchy, when it gets filled, there is a single point.
So every day we hear in the news that company X was hacked and it stole all the personal data of this insurance company or medical records or this and that. So that's essentially what we mean by single point of failure, because when you have a central authority and they hold all the transaction record and all the data, then if they get impacted, then everybody gets impacted, right? Because you're stuck. And not only have you lost the data, but you can't conduct any more transaction, which happens, right? Sometimes when companies are down for a few minutes to few hours to few days because of hacking or some other event that took place in their offices. So what blockchain, because it's peer-to-peer and there is no central authority, because all nodes have the same ledger, right? So even if 5 nodes are failing, it doesn't impact other nodes from continuing their work. So that's what we mean by decentralization removes the single point of failure, which is huge, especially in the financial environment. And that's one of the reasons why blockchain applications are mostly taking place in the financial arena, because it's very, very critical for them. So let's talk about what do we mean by block. So the block is from that blockchain. What does that block consist of? So it basically nothing but validated transaction. Validated is important. Looks like we are losing people. Do we need to take a break or something? Just let me know. Okay. Validated transactions means that before you create a ledger that is secure and everybody has it, you have to make sure that what's in it is actually valid, right? Because if you have an invalid transaction, that defeats the whole purpose, because then it's no longer something that can be trusted. Because you don't know, I as a new person joining this blockchain network, if I am not assured that every transaction that I have access to is a valid transaction, then why would I trust it? Then I can go back to the previous third-party system that we had before, right? So the validated transactions, so each block has whatever transactions they have to, we'll talk a little later how do we validate it, because that's also a process. But for right now, a block is simply all the validated transactions. And then the components are, there's a block header. And all of this is of course based using software and coding on different platforms. But a basic header has metadata about the timestamp, the hash of the previous block, so that it can tie to the previous block to create that chain. Remember that, hold on to that mental image. So previous block has something called a hash, cryptographic hash. So it needs that in the header, so it can identify what is the previous thing it is tied to, and then previous to that, and previous to that, and previous to that. So it's kind of like a, think of that like a train and the buzz of the train. The block header is usually about 80 bytes, which is not a long. So this comes into, the reason I'm talking about this is to understand how much storage cost is needed as a resource, right? Because everything needs resource, everything adds up. So in this case, headers are usually about 80 bytes. So if you're talking, blocks are being generated every 10 minutes. That's by design. Different platforms may vary that how often a block is added. It could differ from platform to platform and which industry you're talking about. So it comes to about 4.2 megabytes per year of storage, which is not very costly these days, right? So you have a block header, and then you have the block, which basically has this bunch of different transactions that have taken place. So what is the purpose of the block? Is to store the transaction securely and link to the previous block. Why do you think that might be important, to link to the previous block?
Then only there will be a chain.
Sorry?
Then there will be a chain with connected to all blocks.
Exactly. And then if I am going to pay somebody some money, not only can I see in this block, but I also need to make sure that I know what other transactions have taken place. Does this person have enough money or not, right? So those kind of things. So you need to see all the transactions, just like in a bank does, right? A bank, when you go to apply, they can see exactly what all are your assets and your liabilities and how much money do you have, so they can determine the rate of interest and give you loan or not. So exactly the same thing. So links to previous block to form a chain, and that gives us the property of immutability, meaning you cannot alter the data once it is entered in a blockchain. And that is a wonderful property, but it's also a liability sometimes. If the data that you entered into the blockchain somehow was incorrect in some detail, you can't change it, then you're stuck with it. So therefore, if you're a company or an organization who is trying to adopt blockchain, you have to make sure you have processes in place to make sure that the errors of transaction are not there, because it's not possible. In the bank, you still have a long process, like Aadhaar card, right? To change a little thing, it is a problem, but it can be done, right? But think of that, if once it is written like that and then you can't change it, then it's going to be very, very problematic to change the information. So we have a block which consists of header and a body, right? Then we have something called nodes. So as I said, nodes are simply computers or devices by which you are accessing the network, and each node maintains a copy of the ledger that is in that blockchain. So if you're part of a blockchain, then my computer will have access to that blockchain ledger. So why? Because then I can see all the transactions that have taken place. Full load and then light node. So keep in mind, we are looking at it in a very simplistic way right now. Once you get into even a node, then it begins to get into details of full loads and light nodes, and then further. So that's okay. We want to make sure we at least have a basic understanding here. So the idea of the nodes, these are the computers or the participants in the network who validate and create new blocks. So without the participant, blockchain cannot be formed. And they maintain an integrity of security. How they do that, we'll take a look again. An example is Bitcoin. Has anybody used any cryptocurrency here? Or so you have? How was your experience? थोड़ा जोर से बोलिएगा. आप ट्रेडिंग करते हैं? अरे वाह. So how is your experience using the blockchain? Good experience. So I guess we'll tell me your name. Shivam. Shivam. Okay, Shivam. So maybe we'll call on you later to tell us more details, since you are the one who is using, not using, you are actually trading. Yeah, so you're a trader. All right. Okay. So far we have learned about blocks and nodes. So next thing, miners. We know that miners, they are the ones who are digging, coal or diamonds or gold or what have you. In this case, they are the ones who are the people or the nodes who, by something called proof of work, they are the ones who validate a block. Without them, a block will not become a block. I know it's confusing a little bit, right? So we have blocks, we have nodes, and then we have miners, which are basically some nodes. So everybody gets a new transaction, right? I sold something and I put that transaction on the blockchain. All the nodes get that information, and then to validate that transaction, which means that first of all, I am who I say I am. The person who is receiving the payment is a person who he or she says he is, and that I have the money to pay the person also, right? So those are the parts of the transaction. So they all have to be validated. They have to be validated by people who are on the nodes, and there's something called proof of work, and that's done by, there is a algorithm setup that the idea is that you each computer or each device on this blockchain node is going to solve a puzzle. The puzzle could be that the hash, we'll talk a little later what a hash is, it has to have 5 zeros in the beginning. So in order to get to that, you're solving, again and again and again, some random number you keep it's kind of like plugging in a random number in an equation to get an output which has first 5 things as a 0. In order to get that is computationally very intensive, and whosoever is the first node that gets that proof of work is the person then says, okay, yes, this transaction is valid and it's accepted as a block, and then once one person does it, then the rest can then move on to the next transaction. Why do people do it? Sometimes there is incentives attached to it, especially in the Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. To do this proof of work, you get some sort of a reward. So that becomes a positive cycle that if I want to get more reward, I want to engage in validating the blocks. Now, why is that incentive being given? The part of it has to do with, so we've created this block, right? Each block is work of different nodes, and each node is a CPU, right? So the participant is really a CPU. Now, in order to break this, right, if I want to take advantage of it, if I'm the bad actor, right, I want to get into this blockchain and steal everybody else's money that has taken place. How do I do that? The longer the chain is, harder it becomes for me to break the chain, because in order to break, I'll have to break each of the blocks proof of work that has been done, right? And because it's computationally intensive by purpose, by design, right? In order to first create a block, this proof of work has to be done, which usually is computationally intensive. It becomes even more so because not only do I have to break this chain, this block, but this previous blocks. So the longer the block is, my computer is just going to keep doing, engaged in that work, and it's nearly impossible. Statistically, there's a lot of probabilities involved in this. And in the Satoshi paper, you will see that it calculates the probability of somebody being able to break all the chain and how it becomes difficulty as the number of block or the n keeps increasing. So the incentives are given for people to validate new blocks as quickly as possible, because the longer the chain becomes, more secure everybody is. Okay? Sorry? Ji haan, proof of work, proof of stake, there are all these different consensus mechanisms. So yeah, we'll be talking about that also. But thank you, yeah, good. So cryptography, how many of you are familiar with what cryptography is? Okay, so you remember as a kids, we used to play a game that instead of saying the word, instead of saying hello, H will become the next letter G and E will become F and so on, right? So we substitute, so that if somebody reading that word at first glance, they wouldn't know that I'm writing the word hello. So that's called cryptography, or basically is the study of keeping things secret. It's been around for thousands of years. I remember reading a wonderful book by this author called Simon Singh. It's called The Code. Any of you get a chance from the library, look it up. He gives a whole history of cryptography, and one of the things that stuck with me was how the time period has changed over centuries, right? Now we are talking about milliseconds, right, in our transactions. But in the olden days, like 2000 years ago, when the wars used to happen, the time was, much longer. So one of the ways in which, jasusi is the spying. So one armies will send a spy to the other army. That spy will go there, collect the information, but because the spy knew coming back here would be very difficult, they would be searched thoroughly. So they would take off all their hair and put the information on their head like tattooing, grow the hair back, and then cross the lines to come back here. So that's for at least a few weeks, right? If not earlier. So it was just hilarious to me that that time frame was, everything was relaxed. Even the wars were relaxed. Okay, yeah, we are fighting the wars. We can wait for months to get the spy network to get the information, but not anymore, of course. So all of you buy things online, right? I'm assuming. So do you know what, how the e-commerce is secured? You remember HTTPS? So that's basically that is a secure transaction, and it's a secure transaction because in I think it was 70s, and I forget the name of three gentlemen. Oh gosh, to me they are heroes. They published a paper on public and private keys. Anybody heard of it? RSA, yeah. I see a couple of hands go up. So I'll do a very quick, brief intro to that in a couple of slides. But basically, it is a system of security, and it's called asymmetric cryptography, which is different from symmetric cryptography. What is symmetric cryptography? That when you lock something, you have a key, right? As long as you keep the key secure, nobody can break that lock. But of course, if somebody takes a copy of it or steals it from you, then it's no longer secure. So that's called symmetric. For every lock, there is a key that works for it, right? Asymmetric is that once I encrypt something, encrypt means that it's no longer the word hello, it's written as something else. It uses something called one-way function. So you put the word through, think of it like there's a black box. It's an encryption one-way function. I feed the word hello and out comes encrypted version of hello, but there's no way to reverse it back. That's what the one-way function is. As opposed to symmetric, where you can put it back in another algorithm and you'll get the word hello. Anybody remember Enigma machine from World War II? There have been a lot of movies about it also. There was this whole thing that Germans had this Enigma machine which allowed them to send very secure messages to their boats about the boats that they could attack of allies, right? And allies could see the transmission of the message, but they couldn't break it because it was very advanced, the Enigma machine. And so what they did was, in Britain, they assembled the best of cryptographers, the mathematicians, the business people, the social scientists, people who had cultural knowledge, and so on. And for months they were together just trying to break this machine, and ultimately they were able to. But the reason they were able to break that code was that even though it was very difficult, they were ultimately able to break it because there's always some pattern when you use any symmetric encryption. So they were able to find this hook, this repeating pattern. They noticed that every time a message was, it had these few characters that were repeating, and once they picked it up, they could, it's kind of like pulling the thread out. To a sweater mein thread nikalta hai na? So once you get that hook, you can unravel the whole thing, and that's exactly what they did. Of course, it was very, very extremely hard to find that pattern in the to begin with, and that's what made Enigma machine very complex. But once they figured that out, that changed the World War II moving forward, because then Allied knew exactly what the message was saying. So then instead of showing the Germans that they knew they had broken the Enigma code, they pretended that they still didn't know, and then over time that reversed the change of the course of war. So that's called symmetric encryption. What we deal with in e-commerce and blockchain and most of the digital world is asymmetric, which is much, much harder to break. So there isn't like any hook that you can put in a different black box and get back the original. Okay. So cryptography is, it uses something called a hash function. So hash function is, think of it as a black box. You feed an input, this hash function does something, and out comes a string of binary or hexadecimal characters, which are very, very difficult to break, and usually they are 256 bit or higher the number of bits, harder it is to break it, of course. So if something is only 2 bits or 8 bits or 16 bits, it's still hard for normal people like us, but with sophisticated machine it's easier. Okay, so far so good. What's cryptographic hash function? Think of it as a black box. You feed an input, out comes this hash, which is encrypted version of whatever your input was. So if input was transaction of who sold what to whom for how much, out comes this hexadecimal string, which is much harder to break. So nobody who's looking at this output or this this hash function, you can't tell, okay, what's actually inside it, what is it saying, okay? So the features are something that is important. The same input, if I say the word hello, it will always give you the same hash function, obviously. However, if I change something slightly, if my H was capital in the first time, now I use a small letter of H, it will give a completely different hash function. So even a slight change will change the hash function. Why is that important or critical? Because when you are the node which is trying to validate a transaction, if you see a hash function is altered because somebody is trying to alter something, you can reject it immediately because it's no longer a valid transaction. Collision resistant. So if two different outputs cannot produce the same hash function. So that's what we mean by collision resistant. So what algorithm or what encryption method is used by Bitcoin based on this? Something called SHA-256 stands for Secure Hash Algorithm. We don't have to understand what exactly or how exactly, because there's a lot of mathematics, sophisticated mathematics involved. But for our purposes, and it's developed by US's National Security Agency. And it produces a 64 character hexadecimal. Do we know what hexadecimal is? Everybody knows what binary is, right? 0 and 1s. But hexadecimal, the numbering system that we use is decimal system, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 numbers. Everything is built off of that. Hexadecimal is that you have 0 through 9 plus A, B, C, D, E, F, right? 16. So combination of that then is used a lot in computer science to do a whole lot of different things, including cryptography. Okay? Any questions so far? No? Everything is perfect? Okay. So what is the role of hash function? First of all, within the block, all the transaction, each individual transaction is not there as identifying the participant's name and the amount or anything. Everything is encrypted. So the transaction will not read like it would look in an Excel spreadsheet, for example. So it's encrypted. And second thing is the hash is used to link this block to the previous block, a different hash to connect it to the previous block, and so on and so forth, forming that chain. So here's a little bit more about cryptographic hash. So what are the properties? It's unique and fixed length string. And it's cornerstone of blockchain security. How? It links the block together. By the way, you're going to get these, do you want to get these slides later? Yes. Okay, so that way you don't have to take extensive notes and just try and form an image in your brain as you're like what is connected to what and what hash might be. So cryptographic hash basically encrypted something. It's used to link the blocks together, and it ensures data integrity. What do we mean by data integrity? So once I have conducted a transaction nobody should be able to come and change that I sold it to somebody else, not the actual person I sold it to, or it wasn't me who sold it, but somebody else who sold it to this person. That's how much amount I charge. Nobody should be able to change that. Instead of this person owing me 100 rupees, now that person owes me 1 rupee only, or 10 million rupees, right? So those are the different kinds of alteration that can take place in a transaction, and a secure transaction or a transaction that has data integrity means none of that can be changed once the transaction is complete. So that is done through encryption and hash encryption. Unique output means that if anybody does try to change something, then it will produce a different hash function which will invalidate it right away, because that's a signal somebody is trying to alter something. One-way function, meaning you can't reverse engineer. So if I give you the hash, it is nearly impossible. It's not impossible, it's nearly impossible, because nothing is impossible in this world. It's nearly impossible to look at this hash function and figure out what the input was or the transaction was, which is what we want in a secure transaction, right? That nobody should be able to, it's nobody's business who paid what to whom and how much, right? It's between those two parties only. And so what does this hash function consist of? It has the transaction data, it has the timestamp, which include the date and the time both, and something called nonce, a number used only once. It's kind of like a random number that is used, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. A nonce is simply a mathematical computer science construct, random number. Everybody is familiar with random numbers. So sometimes what happens is, in an algorithm you give an random number for it to generate something, and the nonce are used in proof of work when you're trying to create a hash which starts with, let's say, 5 zeros. So the blockchain in the Bitcoin and most of the other, like I said, they have set that only the hash function that would be acceptable is if it starts with 5 zeros first. Why? Because that makes it computationally very, very intensive. So not everybody can create. Anybody can create a hash function, right? It's very easy once you have the algorithm and software. But to create a hash function that meets specific criteria set by the blockchain participants is very, very difficult. And you are making it difficult to make it very difficult for somebody to attack or hack or break into it, because that's how you keep it secure. Okay, so far? All right. So here is a quick example. I know it's very hard to read. So basically what you have is, the input is, this is just a test, and it creates a hash function which is hexadecimal, because you see all the 0 through 9 and A through F, and it's a long string, 64 characters, right? But if I change even one letter from small letter to capital letter, it produces a completely different hash function. Okay, do you think any of these hash function would be acceptable on the Bitcoin type of network? No, because it doesn't start with the zeros. So but here this is just to show that the reason it is considered secure is that any slight change results in a completely different hash function, which will mismatch with what is already existing on the chain. So that's how somebody would know, okay, this is not the same as what was here before, so somebody is trying to tamper. Okay, so more about nonce. A nonce is short for numbers used only once. It's a random, or do you think in computer science, how many of you are here from computer science? Couple of you. Do you think random numbers in computer science are completely random? You think so? But usually you have to have a seed, right, for a random number generation? Because I remember I used to do that in my PhD thesis, and you would have to give a seed for it to generate a random number. So if I know the seed, then I know what random numbers might be generated. So it's not truly random. The truly random numbers, if you think, occur only in nature, right? but usually when we are talking about computer science and those applications, everything requires a starting number. That is what is called a seed, and then based on this you generate other random numbers which are then used in other things. The reason we are okay with it is that usually if the seed is large enough and then the random numbers you're generating is large enough, it becomes very, very difficult for people to replicate it, and for all practical purposes it is random number. But I just wanted to make sure we sort of see that everything that we see is gospel truth, that oh, this is absolutely this or absolutely that. There are no absolutes except perhaps in mathematics, pure mathematics. So nonce is used in proof of work systems. The purpose is to create hash and tie it to previous hash. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to meet the difficulty requirement of the blockchain network. So for example, like I said in the third one, a specified number of zeros has to be there in the hash function, let's say 5 or 10 or 2, whatever the. So you need to generate random numbers to keep generating hash functions till you meet that requirement, because you keep discarding the hash that the system is producing till you hit the first one that meets the requirement. That's when, oh, eureka, I have it. So you tried a number, a nonce, and you generate a hash function. If it doesn't have your requirement, you discard it. You come back to your nonce, you try a new nonce, right? You know, incrementing usually by 1. Okay, let me try this. So you keep doing trial and error till you hit upon the hash function that meets the requirements of the blockchain network. So that is the purpose of nonce. By itself it's meaningless, but it is used to create the hash function. Why do we need hash function? To keep the data transaction secure within the block as well as connect to the previous blocks, and that's what gives the immutability and security, the data integrity. Very good. So let's take a quick look. So this is an example of a block. So a block really is, so you have a block number 1. You use a nonce. So these are the transactions. Let's say that $25 were paid by from Darcy to Bingley. You know, so you have this different set of transactions within that block that you're trying to secure, and the previous block has some hash. So this is the hash, right? You can see the number of zeros it has. So in order for this transaction to be validated and accepted into the block, you have to generate a new hash function. In order to do that, let's say you use this as your nonce or a random number, and then if it generates a hash function, let's say with the 5 zeros, then the miners or the nodes, they have a valid hash, and therefore it will become part of the chain. So you're trying to, so this nonce is then producing a hash function that is acceptable to the network. Okay, so it's just like a number you are throwing in there till you get the result that you need. I think we already talked about this. Oh, public and private keys. So this is so it's what kind of encryption is this? Asymmetric. And what is asymmetric again?
Which cannot be reversed.
So if I give the input and I have an output which is encrypted, I cannot reverse engineer to figure out what the input was. That's asymmetric. So how it is made possible is that each participant in the network has a pair of keys. One is public, one is private. Okay. So public key is something I share with everybody. So everybody has my public key, but only I have my private key. And same is true for all the others. So you all will share your public key with everybody, but you will have your private key, right? And these are all, when I say key, these are again functions, you can think of it like a bunch of a string of hexadecimal numbers. So have you heard of the double locking system? That's essentially what it is. So if I have to send you some money securely, right, what are the things that should happen in a digital transaction? Authenticity, meaning am I sure that the transaction I'm sending to, they use the word Alice and Bob. So Alice is sending something to Bob. How does Alice know that only Bob will receive it and not some other third party by hacking or, you know, siphoning the money off during the transaction, because everything is traveling over the network, right? So that's one, authentication. How does Bob know that he is receiving money only from Alice and not somebody else, right? So that is what we mean by authentication. And the second is the so it's called identity authentication for both parties, and of course the amount should not vary. Somewhere in the middle somebody hacks into it and changes the amount that we are getting. So those kind of things in the transaction. So how does that work? So I will use my private key, which only I have, right, and I'll send it to Bob, right? No, take it back. I will use Bob's public key to encrypt it, right? And I'll also use my private key in there. So when I have a more detailed explanation later on with the steps. So the idea is that it can only be opened by Bob using his private key, which ensures that it's Bob only and not somebody else. And Bob knows it came from me because I encrypted it using my private key, and he can open it using my public key. So if Bob has my public key and if he is able to open my message, that means I must have encrypted it, because if somebody else encrypts the message using their private key, it cannot be opened with my public key, right? Well, I know it's a little bit confusing. We'll do this 2 or 3 times. Hopefully we can get it right. So the other thing, because I want to make sure we get to the break certain coverage. Timestamp, that's of course very important, because that's how you make sure how many transactions have occurred and how much total money has been spent and so on and so forth. So timestamp is one very important part of blockchain in a block. So of course we immutable time reference. So it provides the chronological order. If did this transaction happen before another transaction or not? So the timestamp you need, right? And you might say, well, of course, timestamps are used in every transaction. What's the big deal about it? Keep in mind that these are immutable. Nobody can alter these timestamps anymore. So therefore, if some transaction is occurring at this time, then you know that the previous chain will have transactions that happened before in history, in time, right? Because nobody can change these timestamps. What does this mean that because timestamps are immutable? Does everybody understand the word immutable? What do we mean? We can't change or alter it. So how does it prevent double spending? Anybody? What does double spending mean again? That I cannot take the same rupee and spend it multiple times to different parties at the same time, right? I promise this 1 rupee to this person and the same 1 rupee to this person. I can't be sending it to both of them. That's what the fraud is, right? That's what they promise, that I'll give you this money and I'll give you the same money, but one person does not get it or both persons don't get it. So double spending problem is solved because you have access to all the transactions. So you can then see, does this person actually have the money that they're trying to spend or not? Because you have access to the previous transactions. So, and these are immutable. So you know that the person at this point, based on the blockchain information, is showing that they have 100 rupees in their account. So therefore, if they are going to pay me 100 rupees, they can. But if they're going to pay me 150 rupees, then the transaction would be rejected because they know that that person does not have the money. So that's what we mean by double spending prevention because of the timestamps. And of course, the timestamp is usually from January 1, 1970 onwards. In some systems like Excel, it's from January 1, 1900. So depending on different software, they use different starting point. But in most of these blockchain networks, it's from January 1, 1970, because before that, you really didn't have any digital world to begin with. So transaction data. So transaction data, typically you know who's the sender, who's the receiver, how much was the amount, and any metadata that you might need for the purpose, like what was this money for? Was it loan or repayment or what have you? And it's without the transaction data, of course, why would we even need blockchain, right? The whole reason for us to consider blockchain is because we want to keep these transactions secure. So one example in Bitcoin is that this, if Alice is sending some money to Bob, so Alice's public key is the sender's address. So keep in mind that actually you only have a public key. It will not identify that it belongs to Alice necessarily. And so that's another part of anonymity that is in blockchain that we'll talk about later, that you can't really identify who are the people by name. All you know is there are public keys that are publicly available to everybody. But who is tied to that public key is usually anonymous. At least in the public blockchains. In private blockchains, sometimes that is a different story. You also know who is receiving, which is Bob's public key, and the amount and whatever transaction node. So that's basically your transaction data. How are we feeling about blockchain so far? What have we learned? Immutable, transparent, and secure. Okay. And what do we know sort of what is a block, what is a node, what is a transaction, what is a cryptographic hash, what is a nonce? Okay, that's you're doing very well. So let's do a quick check of our knowledge, completely stress-free. If you know it, raise your hands. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves to get the answer. The idea is just to make sure we keep awake. I know it's late and you guys might be feeling sleepy. This is not a subject matter that is, very, very exciting. It is exciting to me, but not to everybody else. So let's do this. Can you, oh boy, this is hard to see, isn't it? Okay, I'll read it out. In blockchain, a cryptographic hash ensures that even a small change in input data produces a completely different hash. All right, it is true. Very good. Okay, the second one is, what is the role of miners in a blockchain network? Perfect, you guys are great. So it is validating transactions and solving cryptographic puzzles to add blocks. And usually what is that called? Proof of work. And proof of work is by, typically in blockchain, at least in Bitcoin, the hash function has to start with 5 zeros in the beginning, which makes it computationally intensive. And what is the purpose again of making it computationally intensive? Immutability, and also preventing attackers. If somebody wants to attack, then they would have to solve that particular hash and all the other hashes before that in order to steal anything from it, which makes it, nearly impossible. Okay, the third one is a timestamp ensures that transactions cannot be altered, backdated. True. All right. I think that's all we have. Oh, there's a fourth one. So in a public-private encryption, a private key is shared. False. You guys are just great. Wow. Okay. Do you guys want to do a couple of quick discussion questions? I am not seeing a robust, but we are still going to do it. Okay, so I think we talked about this, but I wanted to put these discussion questions just to bring home to us some of the main highlights of what we are learning here and the purpose of blockchain. So the question is, how does decentralization prevent or eliminate single point of failure? And why is this important in industries like finance or supply chain? So any thoughts? How about you guys just turn to your neighbors and couple of, let's have a group of each seats and just come up with 2 things that you can think of. And then I'll call randomly people and just, do you know what I'm asking you to do? Okay. I'm not hearing any or seeing any collaboration or going on. Are you guys shy or don't be shy? They're just your audience. This is a time to also make friends and network. Introduce yourself to your neighbor and let's take next 3 minutes to get 2 things. Or you can close your eyes and rest also. Up to you. आपको थोड़ा सा you'll have to speak louder because I don't think I could hear it and maybe the same with other folks. So could you say that again, please?
Okay, actually it's distributed in multiple networks, right? So if anyone want to break anything, any single network, if they break all networks, then they can hack. Otherwise they cannot. Single network is not hackable. Again, it generates the same duplicate all system again.
Right, thank you, that's true. So why is it especially useful for finance or supply chain management? Can you give some specific examples?
Example, there is a one I can call, there is a one example like one killer. There is a four, 5 person are trying to do from the different places. They want to attack in one killer. If all are giving the permission, like a 4, 5 person giving the permission, we can attack now in the same time. Then they can attack. If single will fail, they cannot attack. Same thing happen in finance. If they want to hit in all blocks, they can change anything. Otherwise, they cannot.
Okay, so what are some of the financial events that may require, that can benefit from it?
Like in fintech, what happened? Nowadays, the banks, what they do, they have multiple servers in different countries. Like India have different places, like 7, 8, we don't know. And it's a distributed right now. If we want to finance, what happens if anything gets changed? Immediately they confirm to the other needs. So it should not be breakable. If it is breakable, then it can every countries will get down. Their economy, something happen.
Okay.
They are making this thing.
That's a good example. Thank you. Tell me your name.
Rajan.
Rajendra? Rajan. Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing here because of this projector noise, but thank you. Anybody else? Any other example from supply chain management? What are some specific examples you can think of? And the reason why blockchains are very popular in finance and in supply chain management industry. कुछ बताइए. Supply chain में क्या होता है? What happens in a supply chain management?
Supply chain management, it is as is beneficial because all the stakeholders, whether it is the supplier or it is the consumer, get the better information and they have the same ledger at the same time. So you will get the better transparency to the system.
So there are many examples, like you mentioned. Then supply chain management is full of contracts, right? If a supplier does this, then this will happen, then that will happen. So again, if it is a centralized system, if that system is down, then those contracts may or may not get executed in the manner they should be, right? But if you have a decentralized system, those contracts can still get executed even if certain parts of the nodes are not in operation. What else do we have in supply chain? We have things like, for example, in agriculture industry, you need to know where did this food product or grocery came from, because if there is any, let's say, listeria outbreak or some disease outbreak, then you need to know where did that originate, so you can recall the products from all those shops that purchase the groceries from that particular farm or that particular agriculture entity, right? So again, during that time, if systems come down or are hacked, then you have no way of getting that checking back of where something originated, and therefore you have more time for the disease to proliferate and people dying and all that. But when you have a decentralized system, then you prevent that situation from getting worse. So these are some of the examples of why blockchain is becoming more and more popular in these kind of industries, because they need things that are as foolproof, as tamper-proof as possible and secure. And again, I think we all have the idea about why data integrity and immutability in blockchain would be important. Going back to these organizations, supply chain management, contracts, right? Whatever contracts are drawn, you don't want somebody to go in there and change the terms and conditions of the contract later on, and then you're kind of stuck. Agriculture industry example, you don't want that agriculture farm to change that. No, they never supplied to, they never supplied the spinach, for example, which is causing the break. We only grow mooli or gajar, that kind of thing. Because everything is on paper or digital records. If you can change the digital records, then that becomes the truth, right? So immutability is very, very important, that once something is written down, then nobody else can change it. Think of in customs, right? The reason there is a lot of resistance also in that industry from adopting such measures, because it will then prevent fraud and therefore people making money off these illegal activities and so on, but where it would be extremely useful. So the visual representation, I should have used actual blocks. So you have a block which has transaction data, is linked to another block and another block. So as the chain progresses, you have all these previous blocks kind of floating around behind it, and everybody has access to it, and they can therefore know how many transactions have taken place, and which public key had the most transaction, which public key bought the most, and so on and so forth. They may not know the actual amounts and so on, but they didn't need to know. They just need to know that these were the valid buyers and sellers and so on. So how does this process work? So in very simplistic terms, keep in mind each of these steps is also very, very complicated, but we just want to get an overview picture of how it works. So a transaction is submitted to a blockchain, and the network receives the transaction, meaning it is broadcast to all the nodes in the network. Everybody receives it. Then in order for the new block to be created and propagated, you have to go through that proof of work. So whichever miner then, they get that incentive, and they then accept that new block, and that new block is then again broadcast to everybody. So then we start work on the next set of transactions for a new block, and that's how we keep building this chain. Digital signatures. Digital signatures are needed for me to authenticate that I'm the one selling something, or for me to authenticate I'm the one who is buying something. So digital signatures are, it's nothing new as such, because banks and third parties in digital world, they usually do use digital signatures. But here the idea is that all the transactions then get cryptographic hash, so they become very, very secure and almost unbreakable. So that is something that's not always possible. That's why we always hear about, this bank or that financial institution is getting hacked, and or these days I hear a lot of announcement about how to protect yourself from cybersecurity threats and so on. So the idea of the signature is that only the rightful owner, so if I am the person who's selling something, I am the owner, I didn't steal something from somebody else and trying to pass it off as my own. So I'm the rightful owner, and that therefore anything, I'm the rightful owner, so I'm authenticated, and whatever I'm selling is the thing that belongs to me to sell. When do we take the break? Are you she here? पता कर दीजिए जब तक. So I'm going to skip this because we just talked about, but this comes straight from the Nakamoto article 2008. New transactions are broadcast. So same thing that I was talking about before, the only step that didn't have in the picture was the number 3. That is, once the transaction is broadcast to all the nodes are then working on finding this proof of work to find that hash, and it's pretty self-explanatory actually, right? Okay. So now let's talk a little bit more about this public-private encryption. So the public-private key encryption using the Alice and Bob example, right? Alice is the sender, Bob is supposed to receive a message. So what Alice is going to do is she's going to use Bob's publicly available key, because everybody has the public keys, right? Including Bob. So Alice has Bob's public key. She encrypts the message using Bob's public key. Why? Because only Bob will be able to decrypt it using his private key, right? Only Bob has that private key. Private keys are, only I should have it, nobody else should have it. So the first step is that you take the recipient's public key and encrypt the message. And then so this basically is creating this confidentiality, because only Bob or the recipient can decrypt the message.
If you want, we can have a 10-minute or 15-minute tea break.
Can we do in 5 minutes or so?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
But like wahi time hai na, I don't know how you guys, I know you guys are always ready for a break, but can you stick by for 5 minutes? So I want to finish this slide and then we can do it. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you. So first step was the public key of the recipient is used to encrypt, and it's double encrypted because I then use my private key to double. So it's kind of double lock system. First lock is using the public key of the recipient. The second lock on top is using my private key. Why? Because I then send out the message to everybody. Now, who can decrypt it? I encrypted the second lock is using my private key. Who can decrypt it? Anybody who has my public key, which everybody does. So what's the purpose of me using my private key to do this double encryption? It's not confidentiality, it's authentication, that because only my public key will be able to open this lock, because I locked it with my private key, so then everybody knows that I sent it and not anybody else. So that's an important concept, right? That only I am sending the message, not somebody else, even though everybody can open it. But once they open it, they know it came only from me and not from Karen or Joel or somebody else, right? Is everybody okay? So there are two locks. The first lock is public key of recipient. Second lock is my private key. So the order in which you unlock is whichever is the last has to be opened first. So last in, first out. So my private key tells people that I sent the message, because they have to use my public key to open it. If they try to use somebody else's public key to open this, they can't open it. So far so good? Once they open this, can they read the message? Can anybody read the message? No, because there is still one more lock. And who can open this lock? Whosoever has the corresponding private key, right? So that's why they are called public and private key pairs. So, and there is this order which is followed, which tells people who is the authentic sender and who is the authentic receiver. And because these are encrypted, the message cannot be decrypted by anybody else. So the message integrity is maintained. Everybody good with that? Okay, so I'm gonna do an experiment. आपका नाम था शिवम और वो तो चले गए हैं, शायद उनका नाम मुझे पता था. Who else is a volunteer? I need one more volunteer. आपको तो मैंने volunteer कर दिया. Come on, we'll do a simple experiment just to make sure everybody understands it. ठीक है, उनका हाथ पहले खड़ा हो गया था. आपका नाम क्या है? आदित्य. आदित्य, आप शिवम को एक मैसेज भेजना चाहते हैं. Tell me the process we're going to follow.
So first I'll use their public key, then I'll write the message, then I'll use my private key to authorize that I am the sender.
आप पहले मैसेज लिखेंगे, फिर इनकी पब्लिक की यूज करेंगे, and then
my private key to authorize that I am the sender.
Right. So फिर आप मैसेज भेजेंगे. You know, when you click send or when you hit send or buy on any of the e-commerce platform, that's exactly what's happening. ठीक है. अब शिवम आप क्या करेंगे?
मैं पहले अपना प्राइवेट की यूज करूंगा और उसके बाद फिर
आप उन्होंने अपने प्राइवेट की से सेकंड लॉक लगाया है, तो आपको खोलने के लिए क्या करना पड़ेगा पहले?
उनका पब्लिक की
राइट.
और उसके बाद मेरा प्राइवेट.
Right. Right, simple. It's such a beautiful thing in its simplicity, and that's what those three gentlemen who came up with it, they were mathematicians and computer scientists, and then it took many years for it to be actually implemented in software. But that was the starting point for all e-commerce, because before that they had the problem of how do you secure the messages. You remember those old movies where some businessman would be going someplace with some khufiya stuff and the briefcase would be tied to their hand to keep it secure where nobody else can open it, but of course somebody can cut their hand off and all kinds of things. So this solves all of that problem in the digital world. Thank you, Shivam, and thank you, Aditya. So let me see, everybody has an idea of public-private key. It's okay if you forget it, you have the notes so you can always refer to it. I forget things all the time, so it's perfectly all right. So we'll stop here and then let's take a break. How much time for the break again? 15 minutes? Acha, theek hai, so let's be back here at 5:35. Okay, thank you all.